Hi, everybody. I'm Bob, an alcoholic. And thank you for asking me to come here tonight or to be here tonight. Sorry I can't be there in person. I've had some health issues that prevent me from traveling. I was thinking about your safety committee, and I thought, they seem pretty easy with somebody named Amanda on the safety committee. And then I read that you've got Jocko as one of your guys on the safety committee, and that's straightened me right out. I'm not gonna mess things up. Uh, Anyway, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you, Debbie and Kent, for asking me. I was supposed to be here, be at your meeting last January, and I had, as I mentioned, I had some health issues, and then I was supposed to be there in person this weekend, and I called and said I just not really able to travel yet, so they suggested we do it on Zoom. And so they got even with me. They drained 2 hours of Chuck C and the new pair of glasses out of me from 2 o'clock till 4 o'clock. So uh, I'm grateful to be able to have any part in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've known a number of you people on the screen for a long time, and I sponsor a few of you. Uh, and I loved your group. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. The I was thinking to myself, uh, I live in Oxnard now. I sobered up in the San Fernando Valley, and I moved up here to Oxnard about 35 years ago. 30 some years ago, and I like it here. I live about 100 yards from the Pacific Ocean, and so we get pretty good weather all year round. But Oxnard really is misunderstood. I heard once I moved up here, they said, "Oh, you moved to Oxnard, Bakersfield by the sea." That's not fair. It's not too far off, but it's not fair. Uh, anyway, and I got a lot of friends in Bakersfield. I have a lot of AA. I just gonna tell you stories, okay? I emptied myself before, but I got more stories. I'm thinking of Bakersfield. Uh, I was in Bakersfield around 1968 when Alan, the man who wrote A Member's Eye View of Alcoholics Anonymous, Alan McGinnis, he came up there. He was supposed to speak there. And he was so humiliated. He had worked all his life and saved up for retirement, and he put all his money with an AA financial guy, and the guy squandered it all, and he lost everything. And Alan was so humiliated, he didn't want to go up there. He was supposed to go up and give the spiritual talk, and he said to Eddie Regan, who was his sponsor, he says, there's not a spiritual bone in my body after what happened to me. I can't, I don't know why they would even want me. And Eddie told him, he said, you go up under any conditions, you go up and do and give that talk. And he did, and as is the case with us in Alcoholics Anonymous, they welcomed him with open arms. And as Chuck C used to say, they rocked him to sleep. He gave his talk and he was crying and upset, and he also had cancer, so he knew his days were numbered, but he was so sort of ashamed that he'd lost everything. He hadn't been uh, alert enough to catch it, and so that was part of it. And Eddie just mentioned he a few years later, I was the ticket chairman for the Southern California Convention, and it was in Bakersfield. And uh, Eddie showed up, and he came walking up to me, and he said, I said, "How are you doing, Ed?" And he said, He says, "Okay." He says, uh, "How did he say? Uh, I wish I had my refrigerator." I said, "You're in Bakersfield. What do you need your refrigerator?" He said, "Because I left my banquet tickets on it." So, so I had to, so I wrote him some new banquet tickets. But I don't know, there's always a light side to our Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, there's so many things. The gift I've been given, I think, is we've got all these stories and I remember them. I remember all these, not all of them, but I remember a lot of these stories. Uh, but I'll tell you that I'll start at the beginning. I was born in Detroit. I lived there till I was 8, and then we moved to Massachusetts. Neither my parents nor my brother or sister were alcoholics. We had sort of an idyllic childhood. It would seem that we had a 3-acre baseball field out in back of our house, a trout stream that ran through our yard that they stocked every spring. Across the street was a pond where we learned to ice skate and play hockey. Baseball field half a mile away that we played our regular team games on. And it was just, and we were all into sports, the whole family. And so uh, I didn't get any trouble. But I was a jittery little kid. I remember, well, when about 10 years ago, we were going through our junk out in the garage, and I found my mother had a baby book for me. And the baby book, and the first 4 years of my life, she wrote 2 pages about what a wonderful, sweet baby that, and how just everything, all these superlatives about me and how great I was as a child. And she was so happy with me. And for 4 years, 2 pages each. My 5th birthday, she wrote one sentence, not as nice as it used to be. That was it. So, but I had 4 good sober years right out of the chute. And they and but anyway, like I said, I didn't get much trouble. But I was nervous. I stuttered. I wore glasses. I bit my fingernails. I got pimples as I got older, and I felt awkward around girls as I got into my teens. And I was just sort of jittery. And I was 15 and a half. With baseball practice got canceled, and this friend of mine said, let's get a couple of quarts of beer and we'll go to the park. So he got 2 for him and 2 for me. And we went to the park and I drank those 2 quarts of beer and everything about me changed. Everything in everything changed. I didn't need the glasses. I couldn't see the pimples. Uh, my pimples all cleared up and your pimples all cleared up when I drank 2 quarts of beer. So that was a miracle in itself. And so I thought to myself, I'm going to do this every chance I get. But I didn't get many chances because I grew up in a pretty strict household. We were all Catholics, and we went to church on Sunday, and we studied 2 or 3 hours every night. My brother, my sister, and myself. It wasn't like, that was a punishment. It was like, this is what we do. My mother had not gotten a college education. My father had gotten an education, but it wasn't as fulfilling as he wanted. And their dreams were to send our 3 kids to have them become successful. And it took a long time for me, but I eventually did. Uh, but anyway, this was what they were dreaming, and it was the dream of every Irish Catholic family, I think, in New England to send their son to Notre Dame. And I'm the son that was fortunate enough to go to Notre Dame. Getting a little ahead of myself here. I'm going to keep checking the clock so I don't run over. Uh, and when I got ready to go to high school, I was one of the smarter kids in my class in grammar school and public school, and I could I could get along pretty easily. And I decided to go to the St. John's, which is a college preparatory school 6 miles away in Worcester. And so my parents were surprised, but that's what I decided. And I went there, and immediately I realized that I am no longer one of the smarter kids in the class. I am I'm way down the list, and so for my 4 years of high school, I always felt inferior, like everybody was smarter than I was, but I outstudied them all, so I got good grades. And anyway, when I graduated from high school, I never went back. I mean, for 40 years, they'd call me every 5 years and say, "Come back to the reunion." No, I'm never coming. I'm 3,000 miles away. But on the 40th reunion, they called me, and they called me in a weak moment. I said, okay, I need to see my parents anyway. So I flew back. And when I got there, I went and saw my classmates. And I realized, I looked at, they sat us alphabetically, I think the first year. And, or partly through, when you first started anyway. Uh, they sat us alphabetically, and there was O'Malley, Peterson, Regan, Shields, and Smith. And so I got a hold of their resumes to see. I wonder why I felt so stupid. So O'Malley turned out to be Peter O'Malley, who was this huge politician and politic maker down in Washington, D.C. and in Maryland. That was O'Malley. Peterson was Gordon Peterson, who was the Tom Brokaw of CBS and ABC News in Washington, D.C. for the past 40 years. Regan sells glue machines in Oxnard. Shields was Jack Shields, who was the chief financial officer of Digital, a big computer company in New England. And Smitty is sitting in the back. It was Jack Smith, who was the CEO of General Motors. And so I took a look at their resumes, and I looked at and I looked and wondered, I did what you taught me to do. I forgave them right there, all of them. And they did right on the spot. They never bothered me since, and they treated me like a prince. I thought they're going to treat me like a dog. They treat me like a prince. I went back 5 years later, or 10 years later for the 50th, and they were just the same, just as great. And I've been so blessed. I'm so blessed at all the junctures of my life. But I had all these stupid ideas that I was stupid or that I was inferior or whatever. Anyway, I went on to Notre Dame, and I got along okay there. I was about average among the Notre Dame guys, which was probably above average. But anyway, I got through there. But again, my freshman year, they locked us in the dormitory, and I just studied. I just got good grades, and everybody was proud of me. In my sophomore year, they sort of let the leash out a little, and I figured out the way to get in and out of the campus and up and down the fire escapes and so on. And so as a result, I started getting in trouble, and within 3 months, I was on academic and disciplinary probation, and I stayed that way for the next 3 years. But whenever the heat really got on, I'd quit drinking. When I quit drinking, I study hard, I cram, and I pass my test, and I'd be moved on to the next grade. And that's how I got through, just cramming and not really having a great deal of retention or not and missing a lot of the I did miss the football experiences, but I did miss the a lot of the traditions and a lot of the goodness that I could have absorbed while I was there. Anyhow, I did graduate. I graduated on time with my class. And 2 weeks later, I got a draft notice to go in the Army. So I hurried down to the Navy recruiter, and I said, I understand I can sign up for OCS. And he signed me up for OCS and sent me to Newport, Rhode Island, to the officers candidate school. And they kept us there, locked us up for 18 weeks. And they said, as soon as we got there, they said, you're all college graduates. You just graduated from accredited universities. And I can tell you right now, 28% of you are going to wash out of here. You're not going to become officers. And I thought to myself, well, it must be that I'm in the 72% because I'm not going to get washed out. And so I studied enough and hard enough and well enough that I got commissioned an officer, and they said, now you're an officer and a gentleman, and you can go to town. So we went to downtown Newport that night. And so I remained an officer for the next 4 years. I remained a gentleman for almost 24 hours. And, and that was my, once I got to alcohol, look out. They kept me there for another few weeks in communication school and officers communication school, and I was there. And then they sent me to Ethiopia for the next year and a half. And so it's I got over there, and again, I was I sort of fell into it. I was the youngest officer. I was the lowest ranking officer. We were a Navy unit on an Army base, and they had a 1,200 Army and 128 sailors. And commanding officer of the Navy, our commander, he was a sports nut. But the Army teams were just beat the thunder out of the Navy all the time. And he saw me all out there one night watching him play football, and he said he fired the coach. Then he fired the Navy football coach right there in the field, and he said, "Regan, you're the new football coach, and you're the athletic officer, and I expect you to turn us something in." Well, there's one thing I was able to do was coach and play the sports. So I started playing the sports and coaching the sports, and we started thumping the Army. And that was the only happy time I think that commanding officer had with me in the entire time he was there. He just loved beating the Army, and I was able to beat the Army. So fortunately, I would clean things up. Sometimes I make it sound like I went in the Navy. I went to Notre Dame, and I drank my way through, and then I went to the Navy and just drank my way through, and so on. That's not the case. I went to Notre Dame. You can't go through Notre Dame in 4 years and get a business degree if you're drunk, 24 hours a day or whatever. You can't do it. So I didn't do it. I was sober most of the time, and I did my work. And sometimes it seems like I embellish it or exaggerate it by saying I'd sober up 2 weeks before exams. I study it throughout the school year, but I did a lot of drinking, and I was a blackout drinker and a trouble drinker. So anyway, I'm moving right on through. I finally got transferred back to the Pentagon. I was in the Pentagon, and as I mentioned, too, my service in the Navy was if I had to do it over again, I would love to have done it sober, completely sober. I was in OCS when they had the Bay of Pigs invasion, and I was in Ethiopia when they had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I was on duty in the Chief of the Naval Operations Communications Office when President Kennedy was shot. And so this was the coldest part of the Cold War. And we were all just wondering when we were going to have to dive under the desk or whatever it was to avoid the nuclear mishaps. And so anyway, I got out of the Navy, got my honorable discharge, and my drinking really took off. Some friend of mine in the Army said, you ought to get married. You wouldn't drink so much. So a month later, I got married, and I drank more. Got my trouble. I'm going to have to keep checking with Kent. Kent's texting me the time, so I'll keep an eye on it. Anyway, I finally got an honorable discharge from the Navy. I went out and into the world, and I started working as a salesman, and I got fired a couple of times not because of my drinking, because they wouldn't see me drunk. I would just disappear for 2 or 3 days, and they didn't really approve of that. And finally, I got a job, and they transferred me out here to Southern California, and I worked out here. And I was working out here for a year and a half for this company that transferred me, and my drinking was getting worse and worse. And in January 1967, my wife at the time was 8.5 months pregnant, and I got fired from my job. They repossessed my car. I got fired from my job. A whole bunch of bad things happened all in like a 24 or 36-hour period. I just hit bottom. And I got in touch with this priest in Malibu. He put me in touch with a woman. She met us at the meeting at the Arlington group in LA, and I heard a woman speak, and I didn't take another drink for a week. Went back and heard Norm talk when I was a week sober, and really just changed everything. When I was 11 days sober, they suckered me into going on this couples retreat down in Palos Verdes, and there I met Chuck C. and Elsa. and there is their next door neighbor uh, who became my sponsor, and he he lived right across the driveway from Chuck. It was Betty and uh, mine's failing me right now. Anyway, he became my sponsor for the next Warren. He became my sponsor for the next couple of years, and then he got galloping leukemia, and he died within 5 or 6 days. And so I ended up calling Chuck. His wife told me call Chuck, so I called Chuck and I said I need a sponsor. Warren died, and so he took me on, and my life changed. I started as many of you know, I was on the retreat in 1975 where they made the uh, new pair of glasses. And other things too, though. I was when I that my daughter was born, and then 5 years later, my second daughter was born. And about 1975 or six, they got involved in softball, and so I started coaching their softball teams, and later the soccer teams. And Kathy, my youngest daughter, was on a soccer team, and she was really good. And they picked her on one of these club teams or all-star teams or something, and they wanted it was like an all-star team, and so she started going there, and so I saw, I met the coach, and they were nice people, and I'd go to the games and so on. Well, about 6 months uh, after the season ended, the coach, Jim, called me at home, and he says, Bob, this is Jim. He said, I know you're in AA, and I'm really having a problem. I haven't had a drink in a while, but I haven't gone to any AA meetings, and I figured you could help me. And so I talked to him on the phone for a little while, and I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll meet you at the Carl's Jr. over in Panorama City, or Van Nuys, and we'll talk. So we went over there and we sat for an hour and a half, and we talked. And when we were through talking, I said, oh, by the way, I said, Jim, how did you know I was in AA? He said, "Oh, we were driving in my station wagon to a game, and all the girls in the back of the car were bragging about their parents." And Kathy said, "My dad's an AA, he's been sober for 20 years or whatever the hell it was," and uh, and she was so happy about it. And he said, "I figured since she was so okay about it, I figured it was okay if I gave you a call." And uh, and so here we are, So Jim stayed sober the rest of his life, and he passed away a couple of years ago, and he was a good man. But how we stumble onto these things, I didn't tell him I was in AA, and uh, these things just happen like that. Anyway, I got very much involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't sponsor many people for the first. I was doing all this service work, working on all these conventions, and I was a GSR and a district committee member, and the treasurer of the Southern California Assembly area, and uh, I sponsored a few people, but I was speaking at meetings, just doing everything, and I. And so I got, in totally peaceful and was totally involved. But in 1979, when I was 12 years sober, uh, I didn't mention this afternoon, but my marriage had just crumbled to the point, and Chuck had seen it crumble, and I'd done everything because I just didn't want to be divorced. It wasn't in my plan, but it wasn't a very happy marriage at all. And so I went down to talk to Chuck, and he said, it's time for you to leave. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe he tells somebody it's time to get out of your marriage. But he said that to me. And I thought, if he says it, then it's probably right. And so shortly after that, I moved out. I moved back into a house I owned, my previous house. Uh, and here I was 12 years sober, and I had a styrofoam ice chest as my refrigerator. As I and I was It was really an austere change. She kept the big house, and I got the styrofoam chest. But nonetheless, it worked out okay. I later on I bought it back from her, and moved back in there, uh, and we and we got along pleasantly enough in the divorce. Uh, it's And I just got really involved in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'll tell you, when I went through that divorce, I thought I'm going to start running. I'm going to start jogging. So I went down to this high school near my house, and I started jogging. I jogged a quarter of a mile, one lap around, and I was exhausted. And I came home, and the next night I went back and jogged another quarter of a mile. And within a few weeks, I could run a mile and a half. And so I got involved with, in I got into the running part of it. And I've told you some of the stories, other stories before, but you haven't heard this one. I uh, I ran, and Father Terry was in that same parish where my home group was, St. John Eudes, Mason and Lassen. He was the assistant. And he every Friday night he'd meet me he'd be waiting at the meeting, and he'd say, "Tell me about your running, Bob. Tell me where'd you run last week? What'd you do?" And so I tell him, and I said, "Are you running too, Terry?" He says, "I just run around the neighborhood after I say mass every morning. I just run around the neighborhood." So I didn't pay attention. About 10 years later, I was in San Diego, and at the AA convention, the Southern California convention, and I run into Terry, and he said, "Are you running the 10K over at Harbor Island tomorrow morning?" I said, "Well, I've been, wasn't planning on it. I had some injuries in that, but I, uh, I said I wasn't planning on it, but I got my gear. So you gonna run?" He said, "Yeah." So I said, "I'll meet you there." So all he'd ever said was he went out in the neighborhood and jogged around. He was just skinny priest about my height, but lighter. So anyway. So we start running, and we're running along, and we're running at a pace that he can talk, but it's real hard for me to run at that pace and talk. So I didn't say very much. And so we got out to about 5 miles of the 6.2 miles. And he said, "Bob, do you mind if I go on ahead?" And I said, "No, Terry, go on, go on, go on." And so he ran off on ahead and finished about 100 yards ahead of me, or a couple hundred yards ahead of me. And he hugged me, and when he finished, and it was just really nice. I thought I was humiliated. I didn't tell him, but anyway, about 10 years later, I run into I run into Terry again. I'd seen him a lot in the meantime, but I said, "Terry, did uh, you remember in San Diego when you when you asked me to run that 10K with you, and we got right, we had about a half a mile left, and you asked if you'd go on ahead, and I said, yeah, and you ran off on ahead and waited for me at the end, and I said, do you remember that, Terry?" And he clenched his teeth, and he said, "Like the day I was ordained." He held it in all that time. He was so excited. So I would run into him for the next 20 years at over at Lemke's meeting in Glendale, that clubhouse. Uh, and every time he'd see me, I'd be going there to speak. Every time I'd see him, he'd say, "Bob, tell him that story about the running. Tell him that story about you and me running that race." So I did every time. And he had dementia, and he was forgetting everything except that race. He would remind, I'd see him and I'd think, hopefully he's forgotten it. I hope that dementia set in on that race, but it hadn't. He'd ask me every time. And we had a loving relationship. I don't know, I'm bouncing around here. I guess I'm down to the last 5 minutes or so. Uh, I uh, I have a very, very happy home now. Uh, in 1994, I think I moved up here permanently, and I went to a speaker meeting, and this woman came up to me, a pretty woman came up to me, and she said, "Are you the Purple Panther coach?" And uh, I said, "Yeah, I am." It was the name of my daughter's softball team. And she said, "Oh, I heard you speak several times at the Pacific Group." And I said, "Oh," so we talked, and And then her husband came in, and I was married to somebody, and she was married to somebody, and so we became fast friends, and we stayed friends for the next 17 years. We went to some of the same meetings. We started a meeting that we both went to, but we were both married to other people for a while, and then about 15 years ago. 15 years ago, neither one of us was married. And over the next few months, we got together, and we've been together now for 15 years. And she's the love of my life. And she has 49 years of sobriety. So when we sit here having breakfast in the morning, we've got 108 years of sobriety uh, at our breakfast table, just between the two of us. And so there aren't many fights, and there aren't many arguments. There's a lot of peaceful sharing and absolute joy, and that we get from each other and from you people. You know, we look on this screen, and a lot of you are my friends already, but you know, my life has just been so blessed over. I'm just trying to think what else I could add to it. You want me to tell that Father Terry? I mean, that June G story with Mark. He didn't shake his head. When I was doing that, Dennis is shaking his head. Okay, this is it. Okay, when I was running that, just learning to run, been practicing for like 11 months from the day I took my first step, and I found myself over at near Dodger Stadium to line up for the Hang 10 Marathon, 26 miles, 385 yards. And I've only run half that far before, but I was determined to do it. I was going through that divorce, and I was so miserable so much of the time. The endorphins were the only thing I had left. And so anyway, we got there, and I started running the race, and I got out to 13 miles, and I saw my car, and I felt okay. And got out to 15 miles, and I saw my car for the last time. And I got to 20 miles, and I looked 20 miles, and all of a sudden I felt like Mr. Potato Head, like all my body parts were falling off. And I'd heard of these people hitting the wall at 20 miles, and it was happening to me. And so I slowed up somewhat because I had 6 miles to go, and I was determined to finish. And so I ran the best I could right up to the last quarter mile, and or and so I got the last 300 yards or so at those races. They string these flags, you know, like a supermarket opening, and you run down this chute, and friends and relatives, of which I had none, stand on either side and applaud your effort. And anyway, I started running down there, and they started applauding. Then they start screaming and yelling, and some guy yells out, "Here comes a woman." I look over my shoulder, and it's June, who was 19 years old at the time. She'd been sober 6 years, and she'd bearing down on me. And I said, "There's no way I'm going to let her catch me." So harder I ran, she loped right up beside me. And I said, "Why do you wait 26 miles to humiliate me in front of all these people?" And she said, "Well, I didn't run the race. I just saw you go by. So I jumped over the flags so I could run in with you." So for 59 and a half years, you've been jumping over the flags and running in with me. And I love your group. And I hope I've given you the best I've got for this one day, counting the workshop and the talk. Debbie and Kent, I love you both. And thank you for having me.